Let's jump into this one. Um, this is one of the genes that we're going to find on a lot of different DNA tests. If you've done our DNA test, it's referenced a couple of times in ours. If you've done many of the other DNA tests on the market, this one should be on it if they're looking at metabolic markers. Um, it is involved with glucose transportation. I don't know if we've talked before, if you've watched any of the other videos, but when we're talking about transporters, there's several different types of transporters in our system, and their job is to basically transport glucose to the various cells and the various um, organs in your system. So this one is going to specifically reference what we call GLUT2. There are, I think, 6 or 7 different types of GLUT or different transporters in your body. And this one is really important for cellular support. So GLUT1, just as a quick overview, delivers glucose to red blood cells and to the brain. And GLUT2 moves glucose from the intestines into the bloodstream. So that's what our focus is. This has to do with eating foods that, when we eat foods and they start going down through the digestive process and getting broken down into glucose, and then they need to be transported into the bloodstream. So if we can't even get them into the bloodstream, or if we get them into the bloodstream too quickly, that's where it becomes an issue. GLUT3 is the transporter that helps to take that glucose from the bloodstream into the neurons, and GLUT4 transports glucose into the muscle and the fat cells. And so it's also insulin dependent. And today with the GLUT2 transporter, that one is encoded, meaning that it is impacted. The gene SLC2A2 is what helps us make an efficient or really efficient or less efficient form of this GLUT transporter. It is found in the intestinal cells, so the cells of your wall. So you may have great SLC2A2, but if you've got massive gut issues, then this can be impaired. It's also found in the liver cells and in the pancreatic beta cells and the kidney cells. And so the gene is really important here, but also is the health of all of these organs. When we have a fast GLUT2, glucose floods rapidly into the bloodstream and blood sugar spikes really quickly. If we have a slow GLUT2, glucose enters gradually and we see sustained energy. Essentially, basically, we just talked about this a minute ago. Carbs are broken down after we take them into our system that sends glucose into the gut. A transporter is needed to pull that glucose out of the GI and into the blood. And glucose levels begin to rise in the bloodstream, and that begins the process of signaling to the pancreas to release insulin. And the process begins of us being able to pull glucose into the cells. So your SLC2A2 variant is helpful in understanding how aggressively or how efficiently your system transports and absorbs glucose after every meal. Um, TT is normally considered the wild version of the gene. So it'd be considered a normal version of the gene. That means you've got pretty moderate GLUT2 activity, steady glucose absorption, and often means that you can tolerate a variety of carbs without dramatic spikes. Now, this gene is not the only one that impacts your ability to utilize different types of carbs. This is about your ability to transport those carbohydrates that have been broken down into glucose into the bloodstream. So it's only one piece of the puzzle, but it's an important piece of the puzzle. And if you've got a bit of an impact, just one impact on this gene, then we start to see faster glucose absorption. It tends to speed up this process, and we see blood sugar get higher faster in your bloodstream after eating carbs, especially high glucose carbs. And then if you've got a double impact, then you've got 2 altered alleles on that gene, and what we see is very fast glucose absorption. These are people who are like, oh, I eat, one corn tortilla. I'm just making something up, and my blood sugar spikes super high, yeah, for within 10 minutes of eating it. And that puts us at higher risk of metabolic dysfunction because overactive transporters mean that we're hitting the bloodstream fast, opening up a floodgate. And then what's happening with all those pancreatic beta cells and your ability to respond to insulin? Oftentimes, what we see is insulin overreacts and gets into the bloodstream and pulls glucose out really, really quickly. And so people who carry, this is kind of the what I just explained to you. So if you carry an impact on these genes, what you may see is rapid blood sugar spikes. That would, if you were wearing a CGM, that could push blood sugar up to 150 to 180 milligrams per deciliter within 30 to 60 minutes after eating. And even whole foods like quinoa or fruit can do that. And then we might see a crash in blood sugar because in order to combat that really strong um, rise in glucose, insulin comes in and it comes in a little too hot and too heavy, assuming that you're going to keep that glucose level, that the glucose is going to keep coming, and maybe it's not. And so what happens is insulin overshoots, pulls glucose out of the bloodstream too quickly, and then we start to get irritable and brain fog kicks in and we get shaky, and that can trigger hunger signals. It can trigger um, say like cravings, those types of things, because you're looking for something to balance out that energy because you didn't get the full benefit from the food you just took in. And then we start to see this signal of more carbs, more sugar, more spikes. And frequent insulin spikes promote fat storage because remember, insulin is a signaling hormone. Not only is it a delivery hormone, it becomes a signaling hormone, and high insulin is signaling to the fat cells it's time to grow. And then we get that reactive hypoglycemia where blood sugar drops too low after the insulin surge, and people get shaky and anxious and lightheaded and all those fun things. So, this can help us understand if you've got an impact on this gene, which types of carbs you should prioritize, not just how many. People who have a pretty flexible or pretty normal version of the SLC2A2 gene tend to be able to tolerate a wide variety of carbs. Um, Even things like quinoa and oats and things like that, because their ability to digest them is moderate. Their body is not pulling them into the bloodstream super quickly, which is great. Now, if you're eating those and the blood's, you're pulling them into the bloodstream quickly, or not quickly, pretty averagely, but you've got impacts on other genes that make it less efficient, make you less efficient at clearing that glucose, then that again becomes another conversation about how many carbs you need to be having at a specific time. Um, but there aren't a lot of restrictions on if you've got pretty normal pathways on the other genes, TCFL7-2 and IRS1 and those types of things. Standard carb cycling protocols can work really well. And we want to focus on quality over complexity, meaning some days we have a few more carbs and some days we have less carbs, and we allow the body a chance to burn through them efficiently. If you've got the one impact or a double impact, then we want to be thinking about eating things that are higher in fiber to help support this transporter because it's a fast one. And so we want to give it something we want to give it foods that are slower at breaking down so that it's got something that's already putting on the brakes for it. And not dumping things that are high glycemic into your bloodstream really quickly. So that's where we focus on things like lentils and chickpeas and edamame and quinoa. And then being thoughtful about what we call resistant starch foods, where maybe we cook and cool a sweet potato or a potato with the skin on it, or even oats is something we can cook and then cool. And then if you want to eat it warm, you can warm it up again, and it creates some resistant starch, which is going to actually create more fiber and slow down your how quickly your body pulls it into the bloodstream as a glucose. And this is why berries oftentimes are recommended for a lot of people who have fast blood sugar responses to foods. Um, if you have an impact on this gene, we want to be really thoughtful about some of those tropical fruits. This doesn't mean you can't have any of them, but when we're in the um, the work of restoring glucose metabolism and repairing insulin receptors, we do want to be really thoughtful about limiting or avoiding a lot of the tropical fruits like mangoes and pineapples and bananas because those are high sugar, fast digestion. Those are great when you need energy fast, right? But if you are sitting in a computer like I am a lot of the time, or like many of us are, you don't necessarily need a big hit of glucose to go and sit in a meeting. In fact, that's going to make you feel kind of crummy. And so we want to save these for when we're headed to the gym or we're headed out for a physical activity where our body can utilize them pretty quickly. Being thoughtful to avoid things like dried fruit, candy, juices, things like that. White potatoes, especially white potatoes without the skin on them, because the skin is what's going to contain the fiber that's going to slow that glucose absorption down, especially if they're and eating them hot out of the oven is going to create more of a glucose response than something that's been cooked and then cooled and then gently reheated. And being thoughtful about those instant oats, we want to really upgrade to the steel cut oats because those are going to have more fiber and I'm going to take longer to break down and not going to put so much pressure on this already super efficient, a little bit overactive transporter. mechanism. And then, of course, the processed carbs. These are going to create some big glucose responses because there's not a lot of fiber in them. They're ready to go and they get broken down into glucose really quickly. So I referenced this just a moment ago. One of the ways that we can help keep more of the things that we love in our diet is to cook and cool our starchy carbs. Things like sweet potatoes, quinoa, potatoes with skins on them, even oats, even legumes. If you cook them, cool them, that can lower glycemic response by 20 to 40% before eating because the resistant starch stays and it acts as a fiber. And always eating your carbs with a protein and a fat because protein slows that gastric emptying and it slows glucose release into the bloodstream. Adding vinegar or lemon, especially tossing things with a little bit of vinegar, lemon, apple cider, or adding it in your water before you eat can also slow digestion. Making sure you eat your fiber first. That green starter that's kind of become popularized by what was her name? Um, it, she wrote a book recently. I can't remember what her name is, but she really popularized the idea of making sure you start each of your meals with a green starter. Having something with fiber in it to help slow that glucose really does create kind of a barrier that slows glucose absorption so that everything else that's being eaten after isn't absorbed as quickly. And then, of course, choosing the whole unprocessed forms because they have all of the nutrients in them, they have the fiber in them, and the body just takes longer to break those down, which works in our benefit. Um, Here's a sample for those people who have a impact on their SLC2A2 genes. We could do something like start your morning with eggs and some lentils that were cooked the previous day and then cooled, and you just throw them in with your spinach and saute them and warm them up. We're still getting some good carbs to start your day with, but they're from lentils, they're from spinach, and we've got a good amount of protein and fat and choline in here, which is a really great way to keep blood sugar nice and stable all morning. If you notice here, we've got some quinoa. One of my favorite things is to cook up quinoa is one of those things you take half of a cup of dried quinoa and all of a sudden you've got 3 cups of quinoa or more. So you don't, a little bit goes a long ways. And so that's one that's really easy to cook up, throw it in the fridge, and then pull out small amounts of it and add it to your lunch or throw it in with a salad, add it to your dinner. And because it's been cooked and then cooled, we've developed that resistant starch, which makes it a lot more user friendly for those of us that are trying to manage our blood sugar. Adding Brussels sprouts, broccoli, things like that are already going to be high in fiber. To that cooked quinoa, add some protein to it and maybe squeeze a little bit of lemon juice or apple cider vinegar or toss it with a mustard and vinegar dressing can really help slow down that glucose response and allow you to have pretty steady energy throughout the afternoon. And then in the afternoon, we're thinking berries and almonds for a snack. And maybe dinner, we really start to think about reducing those carbs, especially if you have an impact on that MTNR1B gene, that melatonin gene. We want to be thoughtful about not dumping a bunch of glucose into your bloodstream, especially if your system is already preparing to turn off those insulin responders, and then you end up with a night full of high glucose and you're unable to use, and that can keep you up at night, or it's going to get stored as fat. So keeping your starchy carbs mostly prioritized in the morning and the afternoon can be really helpful here. And prioritizing lots of good, healthy anti-inflammatory fats, lots of good cruciferous veggies, making sure you get a side salad with some vinegar, olive oil, and not just lettuce, right? We want all sorts of beautiful things in here too, artichoke hearts and olives and, tomatoes and sprouts and all those fun things as well. So that gives us kind of a moderate carb intake, but every gram is intentional. You're still getting a lot of good things in your diet, but it's very intentional. It's low glycemic. It's paired with protein and fat. We've really made the most of our day with that resistant starch, and we've front loaded those carbs. So, which can be a really different experience um, than what people are used to if they're eating the carbs at different times of the day. So this is just our quick recap of the different impacts of this SLC2A2 gene. It codes for GLUT2, so think of that as a little dump truck that is, filling up with glucose and taking it across the barrier from your GI into your bloodstream. Some of you have really fast dump trucks. They're dumping their glucose into that bloodstream really fast, and others have got, nice moderate moving carriers and that are keeping that flow of glucose into the bloodstream a little bit more gentle. And if you have one of those hyperactive carriers, then we want to make sure that we're prioritizing things that are higher in fiber, good sources of protein, and that preparation really matters. So let's see if we can. All right. So I will also add the IRS1 and the TCFL72 modules so that you've got all of that. And then those of you that are diving into your genes and trying to get a better understanding as to how to feed yourself so that you can heal some of these pathways will have hopefully all the information that you need. So I'm going to stop the recording here.